and validity of the range. This is going to be done in a highly scientific way, starting with an eye exam. Everything is so controlled, I can't even stand it. And we'll see from there just exactly what the reliability is in the second investigation. But everyone in this study believes that it's going to turn out, the results will be very similar to Sandy's, very similar. So that's a good thing. I want to also share with you that the goal from that is to create sort of a standard way of looking at functional vision for children with CVI, with the range being at the center of that. And then ultimately using that information to advocate for children at the government level, to try to say, we do know, because the second part of this is that there will be an intervention study to look at how children with CVI, how they improve their functional vision when there is sort of a targeted approach versus just random. So stay tuned, I think it'll be very exciting. So I have the image there on this slide that shows something that was offered to a child in phase 1. And the child was supposed to mark some kind of one of these 6 pictures that are black and white, detailed pictures. And of course, this child in phase 1, all they could do is participate passively as their paraprofessional, their one-on-one, hand over hand, help them find the right answer. The presence of light and color is there, right? But we're forgetting something really important, which is the display, and the display matters. So if the student is able, I'm going to just go back for a second. If the student is able to access ventral stream functional vision or detail, and that's roughly a score above 3 on the CVI range, right around 3, recognition of detail will become more likely. But as that person progresses up the CVI range, detail becomes more and more accessible. So my research partner, Mark Borchert, says that CVI is like one gigantic developmental delay of the visual system. This was a really helpful explanation for me. And he said, if you look at the way a newborn baby sees the world, that's kind of what happens in early phase 1. That's the kind of vision that a person in early phase 1 has. And our goal, he said, kids with CVI don't go through the process that other children do, but when we intervene very specifically, starting with that range score, we can actually facilitate that progress that happens automatically in other children. And that essentially is what we're doing. He said that the CVI range breaks down this process into tiny little increments that are doable and progressive. So remember that the higher the range scores, the more ventral stream vision is available. These are just schematics that I think we've all seen pictures like this now, right? That that we have, this ventral and dorsal streams that sort of start in the occipital cortex and then radiate out to other areas of the brain, and they specifically tap into, either parietal or temporal. Ventral stream being temporal, parietal being dorsal. I want to just make this a little more doable. This is a child using dorsal stream vision. I think you can all relate to this. This boy, this is that child. This is the child who parents and teachers will say, how do I know if he's looking at this? And he is looking at it. He's looking at it using dorsal stream vision. So remember, with dorsal stream vision, there's no access to detail, really. Okay, so a picture of this wouldn't be very good, right? And this is the same child who is now the same child a few moments later, who shows us, lo and behold, he does have ventral stream vision. And this is usually best observed through eye to object contact. So you see this child now is looking at this simple pattern on the light box. These are magnetiles. And he's looking straight at it. You could draw a line, an imaginary line from one or both of his eyes to that target. Let's go back. You cannot draw, if you drew a line, an imaginary line from this boy's eye to a target, it would be some target past my shoulder, right? So ventral stream vision can be observed in all of us when we see that eye to object contact. It doesn't, however, mean that the child's interpreting what they're seeing. It just means they have access. So let's talk then about some of the benefits of 3D materials. So the individual is able to gather information that supports recognition, right? So this is about recognition. And let's talk first about touch. By using touch, the child can get a lot of information. So today I'm not going to talk about an either or construct. It's either vision or something else. It's going to be this collaboration of all sensory systems, but maybe not at the same time. Okay, so when this child is touching something, they get all kinds of information from it.
Recording in progress.
And they can figure out, like, is it warm or cold to the touch? Is it metallic? Have I felt something like this before? Is it soft? Is it smooth? And I just left the company of a young boy who was in this space, who, pulled his socks off of his feet and would explore things more, could activate the iPad actually using his feet. And the reason that he doesn't use his hands is that people have been tugging on his hands for a long time. I don't have to tell the folks at Connections about hand under hand, or most of us, but his educational team did not know that it's offensive and actually creates resistance to touch. So we want to make sure that this touch, whether it comes from hands, cheek, toes, wherever, that there's a lot to be learned. The sense of smell can tell us, is it a familiar scent? Do I have something else that smells like this? Is this smell like food? Is this smell something I should avoid? Is it pleasant or unpleasant? So there's information to be gathered. And vision tells us whether I can recognize the form. Does the color help me recognize this thing? Is this thing shiny or moving? Those are all dorsal stream functions. Dorsal stream functions: form, light, color, movement. Okay? So if it is an object in 2D, all of the sensory supports are either reduced or gone, depending upon the type of image. Have we thought about that very much? Have we thought about the fact that when you show a child a picture of something, there isn't any support or there's no ability to kind of go back through your memory log and think, is this something I've tasted before, smelled before, touched before? Is this offensive to me? Does this trigger a memory of something that was really important to me? So remember that. It may be a great accomplishment to be able to offer things in 2D, but there is a lot that's lost. The individual must now rely on previous experience. Okay, visual agnosia, as you know, is associated with seeing but not interpreting, and therefore compensatory skills such as guessing often result. So knowing what you are looking for is key. All right, so again, I'll use an example from a child, when you're old like me, you have short-term memory and that's about it. But there was a boy in this space this morning, and I did an activity with him in the hallway. And I put these small little discs, little translucent discs that might be used on the light box or color. He's an individual who's approaching phase 3. So I used these like 1-inch little discs, and I placed them in random places in the hallway. And it wasn't until he found the first one that he then knew how to find the rest, right? So knowing what you're looking for is key. But remember that seeing a target or image is not the same as identifying the target. And this is the essence, this is the core, this is the centerpiece of CBI, right? So pleasant to look at, but what the heck is it? I know that that Chris talked last week, and you're all aware of the fact that these displays matter. Looking is not interpreting. So what about this? If display matters, especially in 2D, then is this better? Is this better? So for some children, it might be. But what I will share with you is that I have seen people with blue and green hair, but I don't think I've ever seen anyone with a blue face, maybe in Vegas. So these are very, very difficult to interpret. Now, they could be memorized, and that's another approach as well. And by the way, did you all see in the picture of the dinosaurs, did you see 4 dinosaurs wearing a roller skate? 4 of them were wearing roller skate. I'm sure you saw that, right? So, shall I go back? Shall I go back? So now that I've told you what to look for, can you find 4 dinosaurs wearing roller skate? Okay. Shall I show you where they are? Can you see my cursor? Is this showing up? So you see one down here. Now that you see what it looks like, do you see more of them? So this is, you know, this is a very, very big challenge. And I say this because I think too often we're just not careful enough about the fact that this progression really does start with dorsal, ventral stream vision, eye to object contact. I'm aligning my eye with the target. It does not mean I know what I'm looking at that point. It just means the mechanism is ready to take in that information. The rest is really these other layers that we have to add. Okay. So the answer to 3D versus 2D is that, first of all, it has to be a systematic decision, and it's not an either or choice for students in phase 2 and phase 3. A little bit later, I'm going to show you some of the content from the sensory balance checklist, from that process where you can think about how to determine an individual's ability to access certain information. So we're going to get to the sensory balance materials in a little bit, but let's do something else first. I first want to show you something from Matt Tietjen's 2D image inventory. So this was based on, on the work around salient features and comparative thought. Now I have to give hats off here to Connections, because one of the summer, CVI boot camps, there was a particular year where a number of people that attended the boot camp to learn about CVI turned out to be people who carried on and did work that went well beyond that boot camp. But without that, I probably never would have encountered them face to face, nor they me. Matt Tietjen's one of those people, and he decided that he would look more carefully, and all this content is in my book, in the Advanced Principles book, to look at things, to determine the type of images that are most easily interpreted by individuals with CVI. Because let me just ask you about this. I'm going to go back. Are these realistic photographic images? And I imagine that last week, Chris probably talked about, and Jen as well, about how when you look at these, if you're just supposed to memorize them, because it's all motor memory, and that is A-okay, I want you also to recognize that there is an impact to the visual system called visual fatigue. So if these don't really have to be meaningful in that they convey exactly what they are, but rather associated with some communication intention, then I want you to also balance that with the fact that every time this child is looking at this device, their visual battery is wearing down, that their visual fatigue is getting worse. This is not a harmless display. I'm not saying it's a harmful display, but what I'm saying is there's a cost, and the cost is visual fatigue. So shouldn't these displays, so I would say if the child can use motor memory to do this, then we should think really hard about whether we want to make these symbols something that convey the message, but without so much visual clutter. So there, so some of you probably know Barbara, whose child has CVI, and she took all of the symbols off of her son's accent, 1400, I think it was, or 1600, because there were 64 of them, I think, per page. Took all of them off. Now they're just basically a blank grid, and he was able to communicate exactly the same way. So he had used total motor memory. Congratulations. So then who are these symbols for? Who are they for? And I would suggest that they are not necessarily for the benefit of the student, okay? But that's not what you asked me to talk about today. Like that ever stopped me. Okay, so we want to, I'm going to go back to the 2D image inventory because it can be used to evaluate student knowledge of salient visual features as well. So let's say this student looks at those images and knows what they are immediately. That's pretty cool because then there's not as much energy being expended trying to figure out what they are. The 2D image inventory can also be used to support multiple areas of learning and can be used to guide AAC and any communication materials. It uses, so the process includes photographic realistic color images as the easiest to access, realistic color drawings, I'll show you some of these in a moment, stylized abstract color drawings, and then that whole same sequence repeats in black and white. Think of how this is different for children who have ocular visual impairment, for whom black and white might be the most accessible. So as we all know, visual impairment is not one entity, and CVI certainly has its own rules. The procedure is that the student can respond to these images. They're shown these images in a certain order, and verbally or manually, so either by recognition or identification. So they respond to, what is this, or show me the. The images are presented in categories and can be offered from the most challenging or the least challenging. And then we want to find out what the person sees. What do you think this is? Okay, so what do you think this is? Here's an example. This is from Matt's inventory. So what you see here is a realistic color photograph on the right. In the middle, a black and white drawing. And on the left, you see a cartoon or highly stylized image. This sort of crosses boundaries because you have, some color and some black and white. But what this student thought they were seeing was the same student thought the green one was a marker, the black and white one were glasses. Now think, how could those be glasses? Well, have any of you seen the little glasses cases that maybe you can tuck in your pocket that the glasses fold in? If you really think about it, it could be a case for eyeglasses. And the third one was corn because the person was attending to color. Now, if you had to make a choice like in your life or with a device or from a worksheet, and someone said to you that, or in an IQ test, and somebody said, show me the thing that you draw with, right? And they thought, they might get the marker on the right, but if they thought the one on the left was corn, they would miss that as a choice. They would miss that is something you can also draw with. Today, absolutely today, I added this slide just a few minutes ago. I used some of those images with a child, and when I showed this stylized black and white image, even though this student had already seen a picture that was a realistic color photograph and was sort of catching on that these categories repeat. So if there's a fan and a computer and a sink in one group, there's probably those same things in the other group. But when he saw this, he said this was a piano. Think about that. So going from 3D to 2D is, again, maybe not the best question to ask. The real question is, what's the range score? What do the materials look like? and what has this person had experience with. I hope you can all see how this person, I could see almost immediately how this person thought that, right? This one is an example that shows how this student thought the picture on the left, the black and white picture, he said was a bicycle, though the same child knew that the color photographic image on the right were scissors. How can that thing on the left be a bicycle? Well, I want you to just sort of squint your eyes and squint your brain and think about what you're seeing there. And I think we can all see that this could be a really stylized version of wheels and handlebars or some kind of metal parts that cross on a bicycle. Okay. And so finally, I wanted to show you some examples here. So from the 2D image inventory, we see that there are, if you look at the upper left, you'll see there's a realistic picture of a cow, a color drawing that's realistic of a cow, and the stylized color version. The same child who would know the top one, the color, the black and white realistic image, the image of the black and white cow that's realistic is accessible, might think the thing at the bottom, is the wildest thing you've ever heard, might say, oh, that's a, I don't know, that's a purse. These all images are not equivalent. And yet I want you to also think about how materials for literacy are designed. In many cases, materials for literacy are really targeting an audience that is captivated by novelty, right? So if you have a first grade reader, a second grade reading book, they intentionally have stories that have different kinds of illustrations and photographs to captivate the attention of the learner. And so one story might be this fantasy thing with fantasy type images, followed by a story about a realistic giraffe. The person with CBI might be able to catch on to the giraffe possibly, but the other things that are not realistic images will be lost. So again, it's not just a question of 2D, it's really about what kind of 2D can this child handle. I also want to ask you, and if somebody wants to break in and offer their opinion at this point, I would love to hear it. If you look at these three samples, so there's more samples in this by far. This is just a smattering of some of the color choices. There's a whole set of choices for black and white as well. If you look at this smattering of choices, which of these images most closely aligns to board maker symbols or other images used for communication materials? Does anybody want to enter an opinion?
Someone said the cartoons.
Yeah.
Got lots with the cartoons.
Yeah. And so we know now, this is, I think Matt's about to publish a paper on this, that we know that kids with CBI, that's one of the least easily interpreted thing. So if kids with typical vision, and please SLP people interrupt me, like give me your 2 cents, help me. If kids with typical vision are motivated by some of those images, or can at least associate it with something, why are we using these same images with kids who cannot interpret it but still have to look at it? They still have to look at it because they're not blind. So they see these images and the impact can build loads and loads of visual fatigue. So I saw a child the other day that had 2 switches, and the team is really struggling with how to help him develop a communication system. He's 5.5 and he cannot communicate. He's got great receptive language, can't make his needs known. These 2 switches, and on the switches, one was blue and one was red, and on the switches were taped board maker symbols. And one was, I think, done, and the other one was more. I think the color switches alone probably would have been better. So if you want to comment on that, I would be glad to hear your comments, but this is where we have to think. It's not just a matter of 3D or 2D. It's a matter of what kind of imagery we're using, what the display matters, right? Any thoughts there, anyone?
Christine, while we're still on this, there was a couple questions.
Uh-huh.
Referring back to the device and the child that had, were you clear in saying that the child had 0 images on that device?
The mom took them off. She wanted to see if her son truly had motor memory for all of those things, or whether they were helpful to him in some way. And she took every image off. He's basically looking at a blank screen.
Okay, so then there was a question of what happens if when you add more words and things move around on the display, does memory, can the child still learn where they're located?
No. I mean, he can, but it'll take him some time, right? It'll take him some time. And the point wasn't to have that be the final thing. The point was to try to figure out to what extent is vision helping. And it turns out it was mostly all memory, all motor memory. So then if you can remove those or change them in some way so that they're not so visually fatiguing, so that you're not looking at a kaleidoscope, then maybe that's the thing to do. Like, I honestly think we need to revolutionize what devices look like for kids with CVI. We're you know, when you go, this is one of my biggest complaints in life. Get ready. You're probably also glad I'm in a separate room far away from you. That when I go to, so I don't really, I'm pretty much a vegetarian. I would say 99%. When I go to a restaurant and I want to order something that's vegetarian, you know what they give me? They give me something that's a regular dish without meat. I hate that. I want something that's cooked especially for people who like a non-meat dish, right? I want something that's special to my needs or my wants. This is what I think we're doing sometimes with these communication materials and with all kinds of learning materials, is that we're saying that, okay, well, we've made it less complex. We've addressed 1 or 2 characteristics. There's light behind it, it's color, but we've forgotten that what we've basically done is taken that same screen and just taken the meat out of it. We've just made it like business as usual, except we've, maybe added black backgrounds. That's not what kids with CVI probably need. Okay, so what I'm saying is that I know, and I am not an SLP. I am not a communication specialist. I've been so honored to work closely with the people at the Bridge School and the people at Connections, and the people have taught me so much. But what I want to say is that it seems to me we need to upend this entire process and start over for kids with CVI, instead of trying to always take what we think works for other kids and then make it somehow work for kids with CVI. Do you see what I'm saying? It's just different. It's just really different.
Lots of SLPs are agreeing with you that yes, it would require an entire overhaul of a system, which is difficult because many of the systems are designed this way.
Yes, and they have data behind them. They're data driven, so people want to use them. But that means we need to get data behind some other things for kids with CVI because they are such a huge population of children. So, yeah, okay. So here are some of the black and white ones. Now it's even worse, right? Now it's even worse. So we have what are supposed to be realistic black and white drawings. And, oh, I should have put this in. I didn't do it. I saw a display yesterday where the child had some bubble words, some color realistic photographs, and a whole bunch of black and white images. And again, I thought, is this like hedging your bets? Like, which is it? What are you looking for here? Because this child had ventral stream vision and the team thought, okay, 2D's okay. 2D's fine. I'm not so sure it's fine. If that's the case, I would be giving the child, I would be teaching them, we're going to read a story about a shark. In your animals, on your animals page, here's a picture of a shark. Let me give you a shark to hold. Let me give you the shark toy. Let's talk about the fact that this shark has, ventral and dorsal fins. Oh my gosh, I'm a one-trick pony. And that it has, a pointed nose and really sharp teeth, right? Let's give you this experience because this is not going to be enough. And therefore, we never really leave 3D behind. I apologize if I at one time gave a different message to people. And I think I might have inadvertently. Okay. So let's look at what some of the data are that Matt collected around this. And this is also in the book, that it shows that when a child, we're going to look at the percentage at which student A, student B, and student C could recognize these images. If in student A is in mid-phase 2, this child was able to look at these pictures, images of everyday things, like a backpack and just everyday things, a broom, a hairbrush, a toothbrush, a shoe. And the color photographs the student was able to recognize or identify 50% correctly. Realistic color drawings, 0. Abstract color images, 0. Realistic black and white, 0. Abstract black and white, 0. Guess what we need to use with this student? So always default to the realistic. You'll see in every one of these examples that the realistic color image is the way to go. Student B, late phase 2, so score above 5. That 80%, this is the category of images were school things, 80% of the color photographs, 40% of the realistic color photographs, 40% of the abstract color photographs. The realistic black and white were 40 and the abstract black and white for some reason were 50. But they, by far, the color photographs that were realistic were easiest. And in early phase 3, the child looking at school things was able to identify 100% of the color photographs and the realistic color drawings. Abstract color drawings were less, realistic black and white were less, and abstract black and white were the hardest of all. So what we learned from this is that the go-to place is to look at those realistic color images. But what I also want to say is that what happens after with this group of 3 students is that with these images are then set down, they're set aside, and then you teach the child salient visual features. You teach them how to identify the defining features of something. You teach them, I'm going to go back up. You teach them that a cat, has pointed ears and whiskers. And then at some point later, depending upon that child's IEP, you retest them using these images and see if that teaching of salient features to different images, not the testing images, resulted in the child looking at these images in a different way. And that's helpful. That's helpful. So here's some examples. So what is important to do, what I would suggest you do when you are introducing a new image to a device or to a story or to a literacy experience or to a leisure experience or to a, whatever experience, that you find out what the child's seeing. And this can be done in a variety of ways, right? You can have the child try to match it. You can have them tell you, they can recognize it when you say, this child was identifying, and they said this was a fork, the picture at the upper left. And we think probably, the fork sort of has the same basic form as a spoon, but one key difference is the salient feature of the scoop, okay? So students sort of in the ballpark, but really need some direct instruction on salient visual features. So again, this child looked at it, they can see it, but they're not necessarily attending to the most salient features. Think how much easier it would be for kids with communication systems if their symbols were something they could recognize quickly. And that I'll leave that alone. The second one, look at the shoe, was identified as a boat. Once you see this, can't you see how that could be a boat, sort of? In some ways, that gross form of a shoe is similar to the gross form of a boat. Okay, but the salient features, those internal details, are the part that's really throwing the child, the internal details. Just like a child would have difficulty with the symbol for eat versus, drink versus eat. There's just some little nuance difference on the same stick figure, right? That is the devil's in the details. That determines whether the child gets that correctly. So again, I want to say, and I'm sure this was said last week as well, please remember, this child sees this. So even if they're working on motor memory, they still see it. And I will not accept that children who have typical vision are not using some of those visual aspects to confirm the communication button they're trying to find, right? So I want to show this little video of my friend here and Tyler. And Tyler is just a wonderful little boy. And he is, he's a guy that is so in trouble at school. I mean, he's had time where he's not been allowed to come to school because he does really challenging things when he's frustrated, very challenging things. And so let's watch him look at this book. This is a video his mom said I could share with you. And he's looking at a book that is adapted for children with CVI. And I'll let you make that of, what you will. You can take that or leave that. But these are simple color images, right? And so let's watch for a moment what he does.
What's this say? What's that say? Elephant. What's this?
Oh, a monkey.
A monkey? What's this picture? But can you read that word?
A bear.
A bear. What's that?
Sun.
It looks like the sun. What says an animal? What kind of animal?
Okay, what happened there? So can't you just see, just like that shoe could be a boat, that this could be the sun, that it has these sort of like ray-like things around this circle that's yellow. The internal features don't seem to matter too much. So he's using compensatory skills with this 2D information because he doesn't really know their salient features. I also want to ask you, as you watch this, to see how skillfully his mother helps him by filling in some of the content information, which then helps him think cognitively about this context she's giving him, and also relies on the word. He can read some words, and words are easier than pictures. Words are easier than pictures.
Look at the word. Ooh.
Lion.
Lion.
Animals.
These are animals, remember? What's this?
Horns.
Kind of.
Okay, so this mom has also set the stage by saying these are animals. Okay, now he goes into the visual scheme. Go, walk through your brain, find that little room that has the scheme for animals. Okay, I'm living there, and my mom told me now I can narrow down my search to animals. And so this is not, he says this is a horse. And his mom says, kinda, she's going to now take this wonderful moment, though she doesn't know she's doing it, to give him some comparative language. Okay, here we go.
So look at the word. Ow.
Cow.
Cow. What's a cow say?
Moo.
Moo. Very good.
Like a
Right.
horse.
What's that animal?
A turtle.
No, that's a oink, oink,
Lion.
oink, oink.
A pig.
It's a pig. What's this one?
Lion animals.
Funny. Oh, hold on. We're almost done. Hold on. What's this?
Fish and
It's a shark. It's like the fish. It's a shark. What's this one? We see it as a
bird.
It's a bird. We see it at Grandma's house. What kind of bird is it? Quack, quack.
Quack, quack.
Duck. Duck? A duck. Remember, what's this?
octopus.
Octopus, very good. What's this
Okay, do you think there's something about octopus that's especially salient and easy to recognize? Okay, now remember he said that the, which one did he say was a rhino? Oh, the pig, he said was a rhino. Okay, here's a rhino now.
Rhino.
Rhino. You know, he's got a horn. It's a rhino. What's this one?
Bird.
Bird. What's this?
Rhino.
It's a
Cat.
camel. It's got two humps. Camel. Okay. That's a camel. What's that one?
A horse.
It kind of looks like one. Remember we look at the word. Buck.
B.
A buck.
Goat.
All right. Can you? Ooh, look at that. Elephant.
Okay, now he's getting very visually fatigued. He's kind of, you're gonna see him start to burn out a little bit now. And also, these are black and white images. He's gonna start to burn out. Watch what he does.
Now, what's this?
Cat. Monkey.
A monkey. Very good, Bobby.
It's the same order,
What's
same
this
order.
one?
Cat.
We'll read the word.
Cow.
It's a bear.
Pig.
Bear. What's this
A
one?
horse.
A horse.
A car.
That's not a car, Sandy.
Okay, that absolutely could be a car, right? So it's kind of got a shape of a roundish little car. It's got, can't you see the windows there? Can't you see the windows on the car?
Oh, what kind of animal? Remember, starts with a T. Turtle. Is that a turtle?
He's
Yeah,
losing
I'm
it.
playing a game.
Okay, so then he says, I'm playing a game. He's bailing out, right? He's bailing out. So do you have any comments about that? You know, do you have thoughts about what's going on there and why, you know, how on earth could he use those words as a support to recognize these 2D images? And they were almost easier for him sometimes than the images. What's going on there? Anyone?
Visual or prompt auditory?
Very much, but you know, but the real question is, how is it that these words could be easier for him? How could they be easier?
Letters are more limited than pictures.
Oops. Yeah, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean for that to play yet. So what happens here is that the code for words is consistent. So the boy today that said the picture of the garbage can was a piano, he reads above grade level. Please keep this in mind, that when you're thinking about 2D materials, that the image matters profoundly. And until you can think about what is most accessible or what does a child perceive, that you're maybe adding a layer of challenge that, like this little boy, he was only able to persist through like 10, 11 pages, and then he was playing a game. He was out. He was out. Also, notice the pictures changed to black and white. Words are not harder than images. And so there are lots of ways a child uses words, sometimes for reading, sometimes for recognition of something, but they're not harder than some pictures we show. Let's take a look at another person who's struggling with some of this issue, and now she's using 3D materials, okay? And then we'll get rid of those. She's looking for zebras.
Yes. I see right in front. Okay.
Like visual memory.
Keep going. Zebras need a home. Did you see the visual motor characteristic there? Put them back in the big bin. that's a zebra? Not that. How do you know the ones in the box are zebras?
Because they have stripes.
Okay, perfect. Keep going. Just wear some more.
That's it. I think that's it.
So she struggled a little bit with this, but she was able to do it. There's an earlier video of her where she really struggles with. She also puts the Arctic tigers in that box. I want to, while she was doing that task, by the way, and really working hard to sort through those, her sibling was playing with another box of animals in the same room, and this is the display that that child created. So this is what vision gives you, and by the way, a younger sibling, this is what vision gives you in terms of comparative thought, salient features, and being able to really identify something. And what I want to point out is that if you look at this collection of bears, a panda bear, a polar bear, and maybe a grizzly bear, they're not to scale, they're not, you know, and none of them are the same. This was done with no instruction. This child this is what vision gives you. It gives you a chance to really do a deep dive into that kind of comparative thought, okay? Even, I'm not sure you can see, but these two dogs are separated out. A lot of the dogs are separated out based on some very subtle salient features.
Hey, Christine.
Yes.
There are some questions about people who have children with multiple needs, kind of what to do, what to use, and how to assess what these children are interpreting if they are not verbal or AAC users.
Okay, so of course that becomes more challenging, right? And this is where you would do something like it. So I would do, let's say it's back to that zebra task, okay? You can do all kinds of things. You can do auditory scanning, partner assisted. So what do you think you see here? If I say a word and you think it's the one you see, let me know. You can do show me where this goes, and you put it with, they can pick the thing that's most like it. So I have, I have a spoon and a fork laid out, and I give them another spoon. Show me where this goes. That would be a way for that child to do that. It can be, you can even, if you need to or want to, you can even break it down into what do you do with this? Because if a child picks up a spoon and tries to brush their hair with it, that tells you they're not quite getting those salient features, right? So that's I would work really closely with my communication people in the classroom, teachers, to help me understand how we can approach this kind of a task. But this is not a task for a child in phase 1, right? A child in phase 1 is not going to have ventral stream vision to be able to make those fine discriminations anyway, okay? Is there more to that question? Did I hit on what was being asked?
Yeah, just of course, added to that is also limited mobility, kids that aren't independently mobile or have limited upper extremity mobility as well.
Right. And so again, it can be done in lots of ways. The child doesn't have to. So yesterday I did a thing with a child. I wanted to do the complexity sequence cards with the child. This child wasn't going to reach. It doesn't reach. And yet I thought he probably would be able to participate in this task. Also nonverbal, and doesn't really have a reliable AAC system or any system. So what I did was I took 2 sets. You know what the complexity sequence cards are? Do people know what they are? They're cards that show a target image like a duck, a dog, a ball, a spoon, and there are 8 cards in the sequence. Starts with 1 image, then a smaller version of that image, and then that target is placed against more and more of a complex background. And so if a child can talk and point, I just say, fast as you can, touch the dog. And with each card, it gets harder, and fast as they can, they try to touch it. But if you can't do that, I did this instead. I took 2 sets of them, and I started with card 1, where it's just 1 image. And I put them on a blackboard and I said to the child, show me I knew the child had a dog at home, and I knew they knew what a ball was. And I said, show me the one, show me where the dog is. And I used eye gaze. This child is fine going right to left. You could also make it top to bottom. And the child would gaze. And I also looked at the mom and said, help me make sure we're on the same page. If I think it's correct, I want your input as well. Then I would go to the next layer, and I would put 2 pictures and I would randomize them. Now, this time, show me where the ball is. So one picture has a ball in it, one does not at all. Is the child able to find that? And so on until we got through all 8 layers of this. And it turned out, shockingly, the child could find it all the way through about card 7. I would never have known that if I hadn't tried this other way to do it. So I feel like there are always ways. There are always ways to do it. And if I can't do it that way, I will do it in a way that I think partner assisted can be really helpful, you know? So if I ask a parent, because the parents are always with me, or ask a teacher, ask somebody who knows that child well, help me identify when this child's confirming, when they're showing some differentiated response. And if I say, I'm going to show you a picture, let me know when you see the one that's a ball. And the child like wiggles in their chair, and parents nods to me and they say, they're telling me that's the one. I'll take that too. I'll absolutely take that, right? So you don't have to really, you don't have to have head control to do this. You know, you don't. But as we have found with so many of our students, they have far better receptive language than many of us would guess, right? And so the key is to tap into their experience where we can. What would they know, right? Other questions? Okay. All right, so let's look at another way, another important way to consider 3D or 2D. And now I'm going to switch over to a different presentation. And so, well, let me just see if I can exit here. Here we go. So I'm going to now stop sharing this. Notice how I have to say out loud what I'm doing. And now I'm going to start sharing a different one. All right, let's look at this. So some of you might be aware of the learning media assessment that Matt and I developed called an approach to sensory balance. And this is something that fits in with our topic today very closely, because it's important to find out what materials are accessible to your students, what works. And so first of all, let me just define what the problem was. So this has been sitting in my brain for years, and I constantly would, say, I don't think, for those of you who are not vision people, teachers of the visually impaired conduct an assessment called a learning media assessment. All right. And that was designed to identify for all learners what their primary and secondary method was for accessing literacy. And the backstory is this. I think the backstory is pretty interesting. That in the early 20th century, all students with visual impairment were approached from a sight-saving perspective. So it was believed that vision, Becky's going to take you all the way back to the classroom at Pitt. She's just probably having a little bit of a breakdown because it going that far back. But we know that there was this belief that vision was a fixed entity, and that if you were born with low vision, your cup was more, was half full or less. You didn't have as much vision in your cup. Your capacity was diminished. So there were places like, the Myope school that said beyond these doors, vision will not be used. It was just, you come into this class to learn, and we're going to save your sight. We're going to save it. And we're saving it for something really big, but not in this school. We're not using it. And so these children with low vision were even blindfolded when they came into class. This is actually a photograph of the Myope school, one of the classes. Isn't it just the greatest? apparently they weren't blindfolded for the photo. Then Natalie Berga came along. Natalie Berga is, she did a study. She was at Texas Tech, and she did a study showing that she believed actually that vision was not a fixed entity, but a capacity to be built. Her work is part of, her shoulders are part of the shoulders we all stand on, because she was that person who said, I think vision is different. I don't think it's something you use up. Educators now, because she said visual efficiency can be developed, and she did a study that showed that everyone thought, well, if you have any amount of vision, now the opposite is true. You only get Braille instruction if you have no usable vision, because apparently from Natalie Berga's work, we know we have to now, not save your sight, but use your sight at all costs to build this capacity of vision. And the field of low vision skyrockets in the belief that all children with some degree of vision must be visual learners, okay? So I actually had to, there's Natalie. I actually had to, one summer, when I was a teacher of the visually impaired, I had a student who was in first grade. I had her from the time she was a baby, but by the time we got into first grade, I was terrified because this really bright girl was starting to fall further and further behind. And I knew she had an ocular visual impairment, that I had to do something. And I also knew that it was forbidden, it was unethical to teach her Braille because she had some degree of usable vision. So that summer, one summer, her mom brought her to my house every day. Her mom watched my kids, babysat my kids while I taught her daughter Braille. And then she came back in September, magically knowing Braille, and it certainly, I don't know how she learned it, but it wasn't me. So because I was terrified if we didn't do something else, she was going to fail, and it was not acceptable. So the pendulum swung, and this ridiculous situation was set up where it was all or nothing, just as bad as the myope school, in my opinion. So the result was that many students with visual impairment were falling behind in literacy and other school tasks, just like Tara was. So something had to happen, okay? And what happened was in the 1980s, Koenig and Holbrook gave us a method to determine the individual needs of the student who has visual impairment, so that we could determine for that student in that particular year, not forever, but year by year, what is this student using to primarily access literacy, what media need to be used, and what's their backup method. And it had to be visual or tactual as the primary. Auditory at that time could not be primary. So they defined, and I want you to see where this began to fall apart, because as I began to learn more about CVI, I kept thinking, I don't think this is going to work for kids with CVI, because the characteristics, according to the learning media assessment that all TVIs have to complete, you have to think the characteristics of a print learner are that they use their vision efficiently to complete tasks at near. They show interest in pictures and demonstrate the ability to identify pictures or elements within the pictures. They identify their name in print or understand that print has meaning, use print to accomplish other prerequisite reading skill, have a stable visual condition, intact visual central field, shows steady progress in learning, and is free of additional disabilities that would interfere with progress in the conventional reading program. Those are print readers. Braille learners were those students who show preference for exploring. This is from Koenig and Holbrook. This is not Christine Roman. They show preference for exploring their environment tactually. Okay, I want you to stop right now and think about a child that you know in phase 1. Stop right now and think about that child in phase 1. They're showing a preference for exploring the world or the environment tactually. They efficiently use the tactual sense to identify small objects. They pick it up and they kind of like move it around like, oh, what is that thing? What is that thing, right? They use Braille to accomplish other prerequisite reading skills, have an unstable eye condition, and so forth. So where are we then? For a child with CVI, either of these descriptions could be true based on their CVI range phase. right? They could be that child who approaches things visually. They could recognize their name possibly. They could be able to identify elements of some images in 2D. They might be that child who's text, but here's the rub, right? Here's the rub. The rub is that kids with CVI aren't expected to have vision that's a one and done. They're expected to have vision that improves. So by this definition, all children in phase 1 should be offered Braille. All children in phase 1 should be offered Braille. And yet, what's the cross purpose here? The cross purpose is that we are working our souls out to help this child improve their functional vision. So now we have these cross purposes. Which one is it? Which one is it? And these really difficult conflicts result. And teachers of the visually impaired either decide, well, I'm just going to not do the learning media assessment, or I'm just going to put some kind of exception on the, but why? Why can't we get at this problem based on the very specific needs of children with CVI? And that's what I wanted to do. So the learning media assessment approach is now the one that I've been discussing, the one for kids with eye disorders, is considered best practices for students who are identified as visually impaired. You have to do it. But there may be a problem for students who represent the present revolution in thinking about visual impairment, which are children with CVI. I have to stop and say I apologize for the noise in the background. Neonatal follow-up is going on all around me. Those babies would just stop making noise. Okay, in phase 1, truth is it's the adults. In phase 1 CVI, individuals do not rely on vision as a primary way to access information at near or to explore the environment. In phase 1, they may use tactile methods to investigate the properties of an object, and auditory learning often predominates as a major form of learning or leisure. And the risk is this, that the use of the learning media assessment as written before CVI kind of landed on the playing field, though it was there, believe me, it was there, it will produce evidence that the child should be provided access to literacy through tactile as a primary learning medium and auditory as a secondary. But this approach may result in the child with CVI having a methodology that avoids visual supports in favor of tactile and auditory, and therefore use of vision is not emphasized, especially in the early years of greatest visual plasticity. Houston, we have a problem. This cannot work. Okay, so instead, this child with CVI requires a unique approach, emphasizing the use of vision from the time CVI is identified. We have to do this, but imagine the great conflict of a teacher of the visually impaired. Imagine the conflict that says the learning media assessment is sending me down path A, but these CVI people are saying go down path B. What do I do? So the question is visual, tactile, or auditory, and because of neuroplasticity, we expect improvement. Neuroplasticity means the brain can adapt and change with experience, right? That neurons that fire together, wire together. This experience, of course, is what our job is. This experience. Our job is to create an accessible, meaningful experience. An experience that includes vision language learning, right? We have to consider the effective complexity of the environment and materials plays in their ability to use her vision. So the learning media is for everyone, right? So if carried out in a manner true to its intent and spirit, can accommodate these considerations as long as the guiding process those guiding the process have a deep understanding of CVI, understand how it is impacting the student, and apply the LMA through a CVI conscious lens. And that's what the sensory balance approach is. It is the way to approach this problem in a direction that is completely designed for a child with CVI. And Just as we talked about communication displays, like we really should stop trying to jam a square peg in a round hole and say it's good enough. The learning media assessment was really trying to jam kids that are round into a square hole, right? So I'm not going to ask you to read all this. Some of the content is directly from the booklet about learning media assessment, about this. It's called An Approach to Sensory Balance, because we're going to talk about the benefits of using all sensory systems. And so this just shows you the difference between the approach for kids with CVI, the approach for kids with ocular, and that the overlap of what is really the same between them. So we say that the sensory balance is an option. It's an option available to teams to guide professional judgment through a CVI conscious lens. You know, I agreed to those words, option. I agreed to that word, and that those words are going to come back to haunt me, because I don't really believe that. I believe it is necessary, but I compromised on the word option in an attempt to not be, I guess, offensive, which is so, you know, anyone who knows me knows that's low on my list. So anyway, it is used by the same professionals who've conducted the learning media assessment. But what I want to suggest to you is that you don't have to be a teacher of the visually impaired to utilize the sensory balance approach. I think anybody can use it, okay? So we think of this, you know, this sensory balance is kind of this sidecar, this very important supplement to something that was established a long time ago. Okay. Vision, auditory, and tactual trade lead roles. This is what we're going to see, that it is not a primary and secondary way of collecting information. It isn't what is your primary learning medium and what is your secondary. It's going to be, for this activity, which one takes the lead and which ones are support. Okay, so remember that the additional considerations are that the ability to use vision depends upon the phase. And this is 2-dimensional and 3-dimensional. We want to capitalize on the sensitive period of neuroplasticity, which we know younger is better. We want to think about relationships between learning modalities viewed as dynamic and mutually supportive. So it's not vision or nothing, it's vision and something, most likely. Ability to use vision depends upon the complexity of the materials and the environment. So in other words, for all of you who are frustrated with the likes of someone like Christine Roman, who says, make a CVI schedule and show me the vision accommodations to those activities across the day, I'm also saying that there are some situations in which the materials and the environment don't allow us to do that. This is really I think the most important of all of the graphics. Because if you look at phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and you look at those, you know, triangles, what are those? Isosceles, obtuse, I don't know what they are. That you see that in phase 1, where visual behavior is just emerging, and where we know that tactile and auditory are the most reliable ways to interact with materials. You see that the blue triangle at the top is the widest. We see it's the widest, and vision is just a sliver of that then. But we're not done there. We're not done. We're trying to move ever so consistently toward the other end of that graph or that graphic, and show how eventually that tactile and auditory will always have a role, but that vision, like, you know, all the things we read about vision being something between 80 and 90-something% of how we learn, that it will become a dominant sense, right? And it is possible, but you would never say this. You would never use this graphic with a child who had ROP stage 4 and glaucoma, secondary glaucoma, because their vision is not the same. And their future vision cannot be determined to be ever improving. We don't know. So So when specific attention is given to the use of vision in activities for children with CVI and multiple disabilities or challenges, this is not my quote, qualitative analysis has shown that their visual skills continue to improve, but without the emphasis on vision use in activities, the level of visual functioning may even diminish. That's terrifying and exciting. And by the way, when a child uses an appropriate form of AAC, we have a straight line between the child's their functional vision and improvement, potential for improvement. Because what's more gratifying to a child than communicating, speaking their mind? And so this is what I've seen this over and over. I've seen kids who have really accessible AAC, and I also see their CVI range score grow. And you could say it's coincidental, it might be, but how does an 18-year-old who was never in phase 3, who was in mid phase 2 for a long time, show us that ability to just launch into phase 3? The thing that changed for her was her communication device, was her AAC. And she uses it, and she needs it, and she looks at it, and she makes decisions with it. And by the way, her functional vision has improved. A lot of responsibility here to get it right. Okay, so the guiding principles are vision opportunity, educational access, multisensory approach, and intentional balance. So let's just look at this particular graphic. So if you think about this as a supportive partnership between all the sensory systems, sometimes one thing's going to play a lead role, sometimes those other things will play a supportive role, and these things can reverse. So if we have that, and we have this destination, a task that's to be done, and we have a lead media and support media, the principle here is that we need to get across, we need to use this media as the bridge between the child and the destination, you know, the people in the car, the person in the car, and the destination, which is the accomplishment of the task. There will be lead media and there will be support media in order to get there. Okay, so the framework includes the following. You have to have a CVI range score. And then I'm going to show you these forms that are very, very quick to work out, very quick, that we're going to look at the child's learning media profile. And you're going within that, this is the core. The second bullet is really the core, that we're going to look at the learning media, visual learning media, compensatory learning media, multisensory input, technology, and goals. Once you work this through, by the way, you have a lot of really nice content for an IEP. Okay, we'll just touch briefly on the learning media flowchart and activity planning guide. Oh, this is the form, but I'm going to show you a close-up of this in a moment. So there are literally 2 pages to this process, 2 complete pages. That's it. That's it. So this is the first part. The colors that you see on this first part align sort of generally with an approximate phase. So the light blue is phase 1, the green is approximately phase 2, and phase 3 is the gray. And what we do is we do this with the team, okay, with a team. It has been done between an educator or a therapist and a parent, but between, ideally, the team. And we decide which of these media, so again, is it 2-dimensional, is it 3-dimensional? We're answering that question right now. Which of these media are always, sometimes, or never appropriate? ASN, always, sometimes, or never. And so now we're going to look at things like single color light up objects. Can this child, and it's important that we look at the top line. We want to check each form of learning, visual learning medium, to indicate whether the child can look, always look, and interpret the medium. Look at and interpret. So can they look at and interpret single color light up objects? Always, sometimes, never. Mylar objects? Sometimes, always, never. Objects of a specific color of not, single color, non-shiny, one object at a time. Then it progresses to objects with 2 to 3, an array of 2 to 3, an array of 4 to 5, realistic color images of personal objects, meaning things that child, their reference, they're things the child knows, realistic color images of common things that would likely be around them, one image at a time, visual scenes, because honestly, a child might learn to interpret a single image that's realistic, but if you put that giraffe against the savannah, do they still know the giraffe is there? So we also have to look at the visual scene. We look at black and white, an array of 6 or more numbers, letters, words, one word at a time. Then in phase 3, we're looking at can the child always, sometimes, or never look at and interpret an object of any color or pattern. So now I give a child that like that girl had all those animal figures, picture symbols, abstract color illustrations, 2D visual scenes with 10 to 20 elements, connected text with adaptations, connected text without adaptations, worksheets. Oh, there's worksheets. Huh. Funny how many kids get them up when they're up here, right? Oh, there it is. It's way at the end of this. And non-adapted worksheets. Okay. I want to just mention there's a glossary to this, so that if you're not sure what we mean by these particular things, this was actually a task I took on to really define these things, so that so you know what we mean by those things. And again, if you're writing an IEP and you want to put in accommodations, you really might want to use some of this language to describe what you mean by a realistic color image. Okay, and it goes on to describe what a scene is and so forth. Then on that same page, there's a place to indicate the importance of backlighting in accessing visual learning materials, learning media, a plan for developing visual learning. I'm going to show you an example of one that's filled out in a moment. Ways auditory and tactual can support visual learning. Remember, they're the support media if vision is the primary one taking you across the bridge. Compensatory learning media. This has really not been addressed for kids with CVI, I think, specifically. Situations when auditory or tactual must take the lead in learning. So let's say a child is, let's say someone's reading Harry Potter to them. They're reading Harry Potter. It's so dense that this child, it's a long passage, or that someone's reading even just like Goodnight Moon. But let's say it's Harry Potter and this child can't sustain reading or even looking at the pictures. So maybe we're going to read it to them or give them a recorded version of it. And maybe we're going to give them a tactual like wizards want to know what that we're talking about there. Ways vision can support auditory and tactual learning, and then plan for developing tactual, auditory and tactual. This is not an either or proposition. This is the second page, okay? And on that second page, you see this is the top of it, multisensory input and technology, and then goals. Multisensory input. This is so specific to children with CVI. This is so important. Is the child able to use vision simultaneously in combination with the following types of sensory inputs? No auditory input. So can they use vision when there's no auditory input? Always, sometimes, never. Can they use vision when low volume, infrequent auditory input is present? Always, sometimes, never. A moderate amount of competing. I want to tell you right now, there is, I think, a pretty high level of steady competing auditory input outside of my door, and it's driving me nuts. So I would have to say sometimes at best for me, but that is really about, imagine a child with CVI who's in learning centers are going on, and kids are talking, and they're in different parts of the room, and maybe somebody's at learning centers involved in something that's on the computer. We need to know if this person with CVI can perform. Can they visually attend with that going on? Steady environmental inputs. sounds that occur in a familiar environment, and guess what? It's different if you're in a novel environment. These are all very, very important. Next, we'll look at technology. So now it's just a pretty straightforward thing. Does this person with CVI, in order to access their learning media, do they use any of these things? An iPad, a light box, an adaptive keyboard, and so forth. And then there's a place for you to mark whether it's currently in place, recommended, and some others if they're not already there. One of my favorite things of this whole form is to look at the primary stakeholder long-term learning media goals, because the parent, notice who gets to give input here. The parent, the caregiver, the student themselves, or a family member. This is that moment where the person who really has hopes and dreams for this child has their chance to say, this is my long-term learning media goal for my child. This is the direction I would like us to go in. That's so empowering for parents, and I don't think we document that regularly enough. And then additional team comments, that's really important as well. So I want to just show you, we're going to do at least one little case study here after I show you. This is just a flow chart that shows you sort of how we do this. So we ask ourselves first, is the visual media sufficient? So using that form you filled out, if, we're going to ask ourselves, is this, let me pull something out of my drawer here. Is this learning media? Oh, I'll just pull something up, this thing. So let's say I have, I have something this child's going to have to attend to, this nice worksheet here. And I have to ask myself, I have to go back to that form and say, is that nice black and white worksheet, is that sufficient for the child's needs? And I'll go back and look at whether it's always, sometimes, usable. Is this child able to look at use a black and white worksheet accessibly? And if it's yes, I go on and say, and it has to be, by the way, without undue stress or fatigue. Because remember, high complexity tasks, high challenge tasks are going to wipe this child out. If it's a good fit, then we can decide whether the environment, so are the materials okay? And is the environment okay? And if the environment's okay, then we can proceed with the activity. Let's go back to number one. If the media is not accessible, we need to either keep vision in a lead role, but change the materials, or use some other media in a lead role. Okay, so the child can't do this, but it's really important that they have this information, and we need to get this, completed into the office before the next tornado drill. Maybe I'm going to read it to the student. Okay, so, and the same is true if the environment is not is too overwhelming, then we're going to either change the environment or change the media. This is a really nice way to look at the thing that makes so many children with CVI fail, is that we just don't, we know what the child needs, but we keep giving them these other things. We keep giving them things that are inaccessible. Okay, so let me show you an example. I'm sorry, this keeps getting stuck. All right, so let's look at Jack. He's 5 years old. His CVI range score is 2 to 2.5, so phase 1. Jack can sing the ABC song and likes to search through a pile of sponge letters to find the letter of the day, but he's mostly just playing with them, right? He's just like futzing with them. Jack smiles and laughs at the rhyming words in his favorite silly songs. His teacher asked him to locate the object associated with a rhyming sound from an array of 6. So the teacher says, find an object in this, group of things. There's 6 things here. Find the one that starts with the sound of B. Can he do that? So we're going to look here. This is how we've marked this for him. He can always access and interpret color light up, Mylar, objects of a specific color, not so much things that are non-shiny, but one object at a time. Everything else is never. Has that activity proven to be, I'm going to move up here to show you. Has that activity, and I'm going to go back. Has that activity proven to be something that's beyond his visual ability, right? So what's he going to have to do? He's going to have to actually search through the 6 things to find the one that's maybe ball or bat that starts with the sound of the letter B. Tactual or auditory is going to have to take the lead, right? And so we can improve vision. We can help let vision support auditory and tactual by maybe adding color, movement, and light to targets that are offered, maybe giving them one at a time, right? Maybe putting, using a light up spoon, if that's one of the things. And for auditory, we're going to use salient feature language to help increase receptive language associated with that target, okay? So we also know that he can't do it probably in a group very easily, or in a group that's not fairly quiet, because he's only able to really use his vision when there's no auditory competition to his auditory sense. And here's the technology he has in place that we're going to use to help accomplish that task. His parent says that they're hoping that he'll use vision for literacy tasks and access a robust vocabulary or communication system. His team says that Jack currently uses switches for choice making and that they're light up switches, but at this time, he primarily accesses them by reaching and only brief localizations. He hardly looks even barely toward them, okay? He looks away once the recorded message begins. So it's important to know that. All right, so all right, well, let's just go to this. So for his literacy activity, Jack will be able to process only the auditory and tactile information in the classroom. So the environment's a no, right? He will need pre-teaching or reinforcement of the visual aspect in a highly controlled environment, okay? And he'll have to use things that have light up or shiny properties to do that. All right, so for him in that activity with rhyming words, auditory will take the lead and visual and tactual will be the backup. I'd like to just briefly show you one other really quick one, okay? That Sophia has a score of 4. Her learning media shows that she's just emerging in interpreting color photographs of personal things. She loves to explore items tactually, visually, and to smell them. Her team's using 2D materials, letters and words, abstract cartoon drawings, in which she's not able to interpret. So here's what her, that's food, that wasn't supposed to do that. Here's what her learning media profile looks like, and you can see that where her sweet spot is. She has the things in phase 1, and sometimes some of those things that you see in the phase 2 area, and lots of things that show that they're too challenging, like a visual scene with even 2 elements is never. She's not able to interpret that. And here's the issues about backlighting, that we're going to use an iPad and so forth. And there's a plan for visual learning and the ways that auditory and tactual can support. And the same is true here. So I just want to show you that this was sort of the solution. So during literacy, this is what was happening. Staff were reading a series of picture books to her. The picture books featured abstract and complex cartoonish illustrations. She was staring at the lights, wincing, rocking, and making vocalizations throughout the lesson that seemed to indicate dysregulation and distress. Despite constant prompts by the staff to look, she did not visually attend to the pages at all or engage with the instructor's questions about the text. Remember, this is where she is. Okay, these are some of the things they're asking her to do. And look where they land. They land in the Neverland, right? Neverland. Okay, these are the things that she can sometimes do visually. So there's a form in there that shows the activity, the lead modality, supporting modality, and the technology. And again, we'll see for Sophia that we have, that there's this, that she's not able to use the media that are being offered, and that we're going to have to use compensatory media again. that she can interpret objects and photos in a minimally complex environment. So yes, if it's that environment was minimally complex. And so this is kind of what it looks like. So she's now doing kind of an experience story with materials on an iPad, single color images, one image at a time of familiar things. She's also getting tactile reinforcement and even olfactory reinforcement from the cup that she's holding, okay? So in this case, Sophia's, again, using auditory in a lead with visual and tactual as a support. So I want to skip ahead here. I'm going to go to the very, very end of this because this is one. So in phase 3, I just want to show you this, that in phase 3, there's an example of a child who's actually able to do a sort of a geometry activity by using models. She couldn't really understand the models on paper, those paper folding things. So tactual things were made for her. Let me just show you. So these were made for her to support her visual understanding of it. This is obviously a student who's doing academic work. So in her case, it turns out that the media were not sufficient, but we were going to keep visual media in a lead role. Okay, she had to be in a minimally complex environment, as you saw. For her, visual took the lead and tactile was the support. Okay, the ultimate goal of this bridge is for vision to take the lead, and that this child should have a history of supported visual experiences and schemes that will be supported by salient features and comparative language, so that this child's able to do this thing that we really hope, which is be able to reach this goal, to be able to reach the goal of having vision truly take the lead. But I think this is kind of a huge relief to a lot of us who almost felt like it was breaking the rules to give a child some kind of tactual material. That if they're learning a new story, we're watching this video of the giraffe on the savannah. Why would it not be okay to let that child hold the giraffe while looking at it, or look at the giraffe ahead of time, touch it, look at it, talk about its salient features, and then watch the video? That we don't have to ask ourselves for the either or, but if we don't put it within a context, if we don't put it within a context of how a child, what their current abilities are, to be able to use those forms to show what this child's able to efficiently look at and interpret. Okay, we're back to this. Everybody can see this screen now. Then we're really not giving the child the benefit that they need. It's not a yes or no. And I think so often we throw our hands up and say, there are just so many things going on in the classroom that are not adapted for this child's vision. Well, what's the contingency plan then? What is the contingency plan? Do you want to adapt the materials? Do you want to make this an auditory experience? Let's say, this is one of my favorite examples. Child gets a word search. Anybody who has a child who's doing academic work that's in, 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade, they get these crazy word searches. The word search is probably never going to be appropriate for any child with CVI. So what's the compensation? We ask the child to verbally spell the words. It's a spelling reinforcement anyway, right? So there are always ways to use these compensatory abilities or compensatory tools while also thinking that there are many times where vision should take the lead. Okay, remember that backlighting is helpful to reduce visual fatigue and increase attention, and that environment will always matter. I want to say a word about this. So, as I reflect on my career, my wonderful, I'm the most blessed person ever. I get to be with families who enrich my life almost every single day. I get to talk to people who are excited about children with CVI. I get to challenge teams who need some support and a little nudging. I get to help think about policies that will support kids with CVI. I get to do research. I am so lucky. But maybe I made a mistake when I let this whole monster out of the bag, right? Because the Roman bubbling tool turns out to be this very misunderstood thing. The Roman bubbling tool is not it doesn't help a child learn to read in and of itself. So this is core, I see this on 2D materials all the time, as if putting a bubble around something will ensure the reading of that word. But guess what? We still have to teach a child to read. So the word bubbling is only there when a child has the underlying structure associated with salient features and comparative thought. Because if I said these three words are different, the middle word is the shortest word. It's the word word. It's spelled W-O-R-D. It starts with the letter W. The letter W is kind of like a zigzag. It has 4 lines that kind of go up and down. The letter D is at the end of the word. It says D, and it has a round part and a tall part. Okay, this is how the word is spelled. This is what the word looks like. This is the phonemic awareness. This is the content that underlies recognizing the word. But if you bubble a word and think that's going to get a child further along, good luck, because it won't. And I've been told by a lot of angry people, your word bubbling doesn't work. Well, the key is there's a lot of teaching. Imagine teaching that goes into this process. So you could bubble Greek letters for me all day long and I still wouldn't know what they were. Somebody has to teach them to me. And then the word bubbling is effective as a way to help the word have one single container. We help the child recognize the shape so that they don't get stuck in the internal parts of the word. And that should ultimately help with recognition, with discrimination, with some reading, with some communication, with some fluency. I know a lot of children with CVI who struggle with fluency, and the word bubbling would help with that because it helps you not have to stop and sound a word out, but rather know some key phonemic rules and recognize the word. And that's why on a talker, like on an AAC system, we're using it as a symbol that can be recognized. But it also turns out that there's a lot of people who recognize those symbols. There's a lot of peers that are going to know. There's a lot of teachers. There's a lot of aides. There's a lot of, you're surrounded by people who speak that language. And so the words on a talker can become part of a literacy program, can be AAC to be recognized only, but also can build into a much greater shared experience, much greater. So when I see, as I saw in a high school setting, when I saw high school peers approach the student who had a talker, the only things they seemed to really be able to talk about with that person were the things that had words, because they knew that language. I think that matters too. Okay, and then finally, and maybe that is finally. So I'm so sorry, I don't know why this is not advancing properly escaping. Oh, I wanted to mention to you that stay tuned about Light Sail. This is not an advertisement, just an awareness that there is a program supporting the use of 2D materials that can help build some literacy skills for students with CVI that's being carefully developed. So stay tuned. There is both a professional advisory committee and a parent advisory committee associated with this, so that's a good sign. Okay, and now I'm going to stop. And if you have any questions or thoughts or anything you want to share with me,